Hi, everybody. Welcome to Masters of Mash. My name is Pimpdaddysupreme. We have a very special guest today. I'm going to start and give some people some time to come into the stream. I've gotten some feedback from some viewers that they need a little bit of time to get started. So we're going to start this off with something very important to the ECC catalog. All right.
Yes, the rhythm, the rebel. Without a pause, I'm lowering my level. The hard rhymer, where you never been, I'm in. You want styling? You know it's time again. D, the enemy, telling you to hear it. They praise the music, this time they play the lyrics. Some say no to the album, the show, but much the sound I made a year ago. I guess you guess I'm just a radical. Not on sabbatical, yes, to make it critical. The only part of your body should be partying too. Pass the power on the hour from the rebel to you.
Hey, yo, Chuck, man, I don't understand this, man. Yo, you got this slow down, man. You losing them.
Radio, suckers never play me on the mix. They just okay me now, known and grown. When they're clocking my zone, it's no sticking and taking everything that the brother owns. My calling card, recorded and ordered. Supporter of Chesimard, loud and proud. Kicking live, next poet supreme. Loop a troop, bazooka, the scheme. Flavor, a rebel in his own mind. Supporter of my rhyme, designed to scatter a line of suckers who claim I do crime. They on my time, dig it.
Hey, yo, Chuck, I think we taking shots. Yo, this is Cole Medina, man. Come on, kick it.
Terminator X. My calling card, recorded and ordered. Supporter of Chesimard, loud and proud. Kicking live, next poet supreme. Loop a troop, bazooka, the scheme. Flavor, a rebel in his own mind. Supporter of my rhyme, designed to scatter a line of suckers who claim I do crime. They on my time, dig it.
Hey, yo, Chuck, I think we taking shots. Yo, this is Cole Medina, man. Come on, kick it.
Terminator X.
Hi, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. So great. Well, I actually am Columbus, Ohio, born and raised. And so I grew up here. And while I did move away to San Francisco for a few years, otherwise, I've mostly lived my life here, which has been just fine. And boy, let's see, we're really going back, right? We're rewinding all the way back to the womb.
We are.
Maybe just a little forward or something. Speaking of womb, my womb and my dad came from, they are both mathematicians turned computer programmers. So I had this just utterly geeky, wonderfully geeky upbringing, which was I think really kind of perfect. I mean, I really fell into it and embraced it. I don't think my sister was quite so crazy about that, but that said, I loved growing up and learning pi to however many decimal places that I knew it for way back then. Learned how to use a slide rule super early. All the proper geek rites of passage, I think. But the perhaps the one I didn't really have was like a super diverse musical upbringing. While I definitely had like a lot of music in growing up and took music lessons in piano and trombone and even violin for a while, and I was in stage band in high school and so on like that. I didn't really have like a band during high school, and I didn't really know that much like unusual music. There was no college radio station here, at least not one that was like alternative music. And there was, I didn't really, I don't know, I guess I didn't have any cool friends. Hello, geek upbringing, right? So, I just didn't really know that there was like some really unusual stuff out there. I think that like the one thing that really did help was Dr. Demento, because I lucked into when I was growing up, Dr. Demento when that radio show started broadcasting and syndicating, like the Columbus radio station QFM was one of the very first, actually the very first of the 5 that picked him up and carried that show all the way till when they stopped syndicating it only a few years ago. But so while that was definitely not, the cool music to know about, it was definitely awesome because it just totally, I don't know, I guess maybe it worked with my total nerdy geek upbringing, and then showed me like just a lot of like really unusual possibilities with music. I think probably more so that if I had been listening to a college radio station, if I could have.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you said that you didn't grow up with anything like unusual or strange. But for most people, like novelty, like people like yourself and myself, because my father was a novelty songwriter, and I grew up with like Buchanan and Goodman and Dr. Demento and all that same stuff that you did. To us, that was serious music. That was normal music.
Right.
As wild and weird as it was, that was just our day to day. But for most people, they would say that is the fish heads, roly poly fish heads. That's eat them up, yum. That's not top 40 for them,
disc.
But it's top 40 for us.
Right. Yeah. My top 40 countdown was always Dr. Demento's, weekend on Sunday night countdown that what top 5 that they would have introduced with those wonderful what were they little bits from Instrument Builder. Why can't I think of it? Harry Parch, which I didn't really know about until a lot later. And once I did, Harry Parch became like a really big influence for me as well.
Microtones.
Yeah, but also like instrument building, like the need to build your own instruments to make the music in your head real.
And I'm sure the math helped with all of that as well.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I didn't really, for a long time, like I didn't really overlap so much like the geeky, nerdy, computer-driven, I was into computers super early because my parents were both programmers, so I had access to computers that they would take home very early, and these would be like dial-up, dial-up modem terminals. One I remember very fondly would just print on thermal paper. It had no screen. It would just print. Wow. And so you would be typing back and forth. And there was like an adventure game, luckily the original adventure game, text adventure game that was on their systems, which I just loved those things. I started programming about as early as I could. And it took a while before I could really overlap that with music or art stuffs at all, because there really just wasn't that possibility unless you were in some experimental university lab or something like that, which I was not. I'm talking about when I was growing up here before high school. But that said, like I was super into computers enough so that I ended up like I audited one university computing programming course before I got into high school, even for COBOL. You'll be happy to know.
That's amazing.
on punch cards, which was the last year that Ohio State University actually used punch cards before they ditched the whole system.
So
but
you do
just-
know that right now your story is really solidifying your grandfather of mashups thing, right?
I know, right? Just what I need to look older. Oh well.
I will say though, some of the things that I've talked with you about in the past that coincide with what you're talking about now are fascinating. The fact that not only were you introduced to computers at such a young age, but when you look at, like, if you watched, the fake documentary, was it a Pirates of Silicon Valley or whatnot, about the early startup of, like, Apple and, like, Bill Gates versus, Steve Jobs, kind of stuff like that. They get into a little bit of, like, the early hacking scene and, the Captain Crunch and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. You were actually a hacker during that time period. So much so that one of the things that I think is so impressive is that when you in 1980, hold on a second. I have it written down here. It's literally in December 8th, 1980, you hacked into a Newswire account to read about John Lennon's assassination.
Yes, I did. Wow, that is some deep digging there. But yeah, that was I guess let's see, was it? Oh yeah, that was hacking into CompuServe before I worked there. Yeah, that's what it was. Which I worked there later. That was one thing. All the amazing stuff, like just like you were describing, was always going on West Coast. And I always felt like, oh man, here I am in Ohio, what have I got? But CompuServe was actually based out of here. And for those that wouldn't know or couldn't possibly remember, CompuServe was kind of like, in a sense, like a possible internet before the internet. So long before, like a decade before the internet was the internet, became even just called the internet, let alone had all the possible things, websites and everything that we've come to know. CompuServe was doing this stuff privately. You could subscribe to their service, and in the mid 1980s, you could dial up and you could, book flights. You could chat to other people by text. You could send email and so on like that. I mean, these were all things that were outlandishly high tech at that point, because, I mean, there was no internet, right? There were no cell phones. There was no texting, so having like any sort of instant communication or commerce, for that matter, was phenomenally advanced.
Yeah, well before Facebook, well before MySpace or Friendster or Tribate or anything that you can imagine. If you're of our generation, or specifically your generation, you had BBSs, you had bulletin board systems.
Right.
And that was your Facebook. You'd get on there, you'd chat with other people, you'd join and talk about a specific subject or whatnot. And there was even early file sharing. I remember, like, it being like, I think it was like 87 my parents had Comcast, or no, it was probably like 85 had CompuServe. And I think the thing that amazed me was that my stepfather downloaded a magazine. Like, and it took like a week or something. It was just forever. It cost him $1 million, but I mean, at the time, like, it wasn't really $1 million, but he owned some recording studios, so like he was doing that kind of thing. He just thought it was neat and would spend the money to do it. So.
Right. And BBS systems were something that I got into a bit before hacking into that CompuServe account. So in the earlier 80s, I was doing a lot of dialing up to various BBSs. At that time, if you were a computer hacker type, and you were using BBSs, for example, you would also probably be a phone phreaker, spelled with a PH, phreaker. And phone phreakers were sort of hackers that specifically dealt with phone related things, because long distance phone calls to all these BBSs were otherwise expensive. This was back when, long before you had any sort of all you can eat long distance plans or whatever. Anything calling outside of your local area code was going to cost. And so you would become a phone phreaker, so you could come up with south of the law ways that you could dial these things for free. And so I was doing a lot of that, doing a lot of otherwise computer hacking. And yeah, I luckily did not get caught for it, although I did end up on the front page of my local newspaper. I did not realize this was going to happen. I was interviewed by someone. I thought, oh, this is going to be, on the back pages or whatever, like no one's going to know about this. And of course, front page of the paper. I'm sitting at my family dining room table for breakfast before school one day. I see this article. I know from the headline exactly what it must be. They, of course, don't use my real name. I have a hacker name, Lord Python. And
Before the language?
and what's that?
Before the language, right?
Well before the language.
Great.
So I knew that my dad probably knew my hacker name. And so when he saw that, he probably didn't know it was a hacker name, though.
Right.
But when he saw that, I knew he must know. And like later in the day, he kind of caught me like alone and just it basically said one thing: don't get caught. And that was all he said about the whole thing.
I feel like that fatherly advice probably set you on the track for your entire career, did it not?
It absolutely did, yes. I'm happy to say I have not been at least seriously caught ever since, and since and before. But definitely the hacker upbringing like really actually did kind of lead into the music stuff that I ended up doing later. So let's see. I guess forward. I don't know how much we forward ahead here. I guess I'll forward to past high school, and I've gotten this bug to make music and to do something electronic. And electronic music is still, for someone that doesn't have a lot of money, is still largely out of reach because synthesizers are still pretty expensive. There are no keyboard samplers at that point.
Yeah.
And this is now the mid 80s, and there's no digital, audio technology that's, possible either. So I'm trying to cobble together, a synthesizer here, a drum machine there. And I do end up programming my Apple II Plus computer to do some music stuff. In fact, I actually wrote in assembly language sampling an audio sampling program that would sample through the cassette port, the data port that you would load programs in and save them. And so I could do a very lo-fi sampling, which I loaded up with Art of Noise samples and would do live keyboard triggered playbacks of. It was amazing for that time. Like when I think back to it, it's like I gotta find that again.
You definitely do. I also want to see that newspaper article if you can find the picture of you on the newspaper. That being said, you just mentioned something very important that we need to talk about, and that is your musical influences. Like I know for a fact that you and I share that great love for Art of Noise.
Absolutely, yes. So let's see, I guess this would be right around the end of being in high school. I'll say 82, 83, 84. I started discovering the outside world of music, not just outsiders, but that is, first it was like to the punk rock club, which also conveniently was the goth club and the reggae club. And, the
Columbus
sort of
is a tight-knit community, I'm sure.
Yeah, basically post-disco weirdo club, I would say. But this like really introduced me to a lot of other things. Actually, the owner of the club was super into like funk stuff. So that really introduced me to funk as well. I started discovering all these things like Art of Noise and all the 80s names that we still know and listen to now, and quite a few that we don't. Certainly Art of Noise was huge. I did not know at the time, but there was certainly one particular person that in there that was the reason for that, which is Paul Morley. Paul Morley, a music critic for CME, and then later an author, but really interesting guy. And I realize now, like, he was totally the reason that Art of Noise in the earlier days had a very anarchic, like non-commercial kind of bent that eventually they started, doing Dragnet covers and sampling Duane Eddy, and all was lost.
Right. No more political, angst.
Yeah, and I didn't realize at the time that the Art of Noise, I mean, I sort of had a hint, like I knew the Art of Noise was named after some manifesto or something like that. And I thought, well, maybe they made that up. I don't know. And later I would start learning more and more about that. And um it was like the Art of Noise's manifesto. So written, let's see, 103 years ago now.
Yep.
I am still in awe of it. I mean, it really basically predicted that we would actually splice together random sounds of mechanical things and machinery and guns and put them all together into something that we would call music and enjoy it and enjoy listening
Right.
to it.
Hence dubstep. Yes.
Hence dubstep, hence noise core, hence laptop core, hence so many things that have now come to be like enjoyable pastimes that people go to see performers do. But really, this manifesto, they nailed it, and like 100+ years ago, really amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That being said, you told me that you love predictions.
loved predictions.
Like, were you like a fan of like old cinema? Did you know who Kreskin
Oh,
was?
yeah,
And what
yeah,
fuels
that
that?
is like how the future used to be, basically. Like,
Retrofuturism.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just adore. I don't know. I can't, it really is kind of like a fetish, I guess, in a way. Like I can't, like really fully justify or explain it or something like that. I just effing love it. Just the whole notion of the future as it looked from like the 1950s or 60s in this wonderful era of optimism and discovery of how we can make plastics, do modernist and minimalist things. And, there was this great sense of design and I don't know. It all came together into something that I still really keep looking back to that. I suppose when I look at, some of the music that I started doing, especially when I started wearing lab coats or white jumpsuits that, had this test pilot kind of looking or mad scientist looking sort of thing, I'm sure that totally speaks to that in a way. I did like one show which was like the kitchen of the future, very much built on that sort of
We will talk about
worship
that for
of
sure.
influences. Yeah. Okay.
Back on the influences, though, real quick. You had mentioned a band that I'm not too familiar with. I think I've seen like one or two things. It kind of pops into my head. Severed Heads. Can you tell me a little bit
Severed
about
Heads.
that?
For those not familiar, Severed Heads is an Australian band. Let's see, mostly the product of Tom Ellard is the name most people would know now, but originally had other members, especially Gary Bradbury, who Gary Bradbury, I realized later was, I guess, let's see, if who what Paul Morley is to the Art of Noise, Gary Bradbury is to the Severed Heads for me. He brought some anarchic element, element of crunch and feedback and I had a difficulty that I really, really liked and was sad when it left when the Severed Heads joined Network Records and started releasing more records that us Americans could end up getting. But before that, they were doing all these tape loops and really erratic, sometimes arrhythmic, but often chopped up, like with bits of found audio, but also with like very, I guess you might call, say, power electronics, as sometimes the genre is called, like, really raw electronic kind of elements too. So yeah, they became something really influential for me as well. Partially, as much for their music as well as for their sort of spirit of invention and I don't know, the need to create or try doing things to change things up and to build things where the tools aren't there to make, what they want to do.
Another band that you had mentioned was Propaganda.
Yeah. Propaganda. Were you familiar with them? Or
Again,
very
I think
familiar with
only
them?
just a handful of singles. I might have a 12-inch single back here somewhere, but other than
Yeah.
that, it never really registered huge on my radar.
Yeah. certainly bit of teenage lust for the lead singer Claudia Uterbrücken, and also the just utterly Germanic nature to them at times, but also like just I don't know their songwriting, their presentation. They were also on ZTT Zang Tum Tum Records, which Art of Noise was on, and again I realized later Zang Tum Tum, another nod to the Art of Noise's manifesto. If you didn't know that, but so propaganda also sort of like fell into this kind of I don't know, this way that Zhang Tum Tum was presenting music in this sort of artsy kind of way, but not totally artsy. I don't know. It wasn't. I don't know. Somehow, I think because I probably hadn't been exposed to a lot of modern art to know any better, it was artsy enough that certainly like lured me in. Yeah.
So these early bands, like you said, you graduated high school like early '80s, yes, and then you moved into some of these late '70s, early '80s bands, like influencing your decisions to start bands of your own. What was the first group that you started?
Let's see. I guess it was the Evolution Control Committee. So the name that I've used for so many years to put most of my music out, the Evolution Control Committee, I first used in 1986, I'm pretty sure, towards the end of it, where I was going to DeVry Institute of Technology. And I was there when they had a talent show, and so I had put together just enough music with the one synthesizer and one drum machine and the one cassette 4-track recorder that I had to be able to do a show, which totally bombed, of course. But fine. Luckily, I was young and optimistic and foolish enough not to pay any attention to that. And so I just went right on and went and entered the Battle of the Bands at the punk club that I was going to, Crazy Mamas. That was the next year in 1987. And there, that really started me really going. I made a cassette recording of that show. I released that. That was my first release, Notes of Nihilistic Bliss. And then there was probably a cassette album release every year, about one a year every year after that for many years. So yeah, that's when really things started rolling.
It's funny when you talk about some of this early stuff because...
can I actually mention one influence which wasn't an influence?
Sure.
One that comes up a lot that I get asked a lot is Devo, because Devo is also an Ohio weirdo band. And Devo was not really on my radar. I just, I don't know why. I think it was because maybe I don't know. I guess I can't really describe why. I mean, I certainly was aware of them. I remember vaguely seeing them on Saturday Night Live in one of those very, very early days.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it didn't really... I don't know. Either I wasn't in the same circles, I wasn't going to the clubs that had them perform. Whatever the case, they just weren't really that big of an influence for me.
But they should have been an influence, is what you're saying.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, I certainly love them and respect them, and now, like I go back and listen. Really, really appreciate what they did, and especially like seeing what Mark Mothersbaugh, as like an individual artist too, has done all this time as well. And there's so many reasons to really appreciate them now, but I just didn't really know them then.
Yeah, so more like a midlife inspiration. Would you say?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
All right. So that being said, 1987, you put out your first cassette it was basically like live stuff from Crazy Mamas, from like your band stuff there. I was lucky enough in the early 2000s to hear some of that, because I mean, to be able to get your cassettes, most of your cassettes have been sold out by the early 2000s and only existed in like pictures of the cassette on your website, the evolution-control.com. And I wound up finding a mutual friend through a mailing list I was on, a Negative Land mailing list called Snuggles, which you also were a member of, which is how I initially had contact with you. But a woman named Virago, aka my friend Connie, she has an artist persona of Mittelschmerz. Mittelschmerz, it basically means like ovulation pain. And I think German. But she contributed to Free Speech for Sale and Dictionary Oki, some Snuggles projects that had come out. but she had her own web space, and she was a big fan of your music. And so on middleschmerz.org, which is still up to this day, you can turn around and actually like listen to some of these early tracks on these cassettes. So like I said, early 2001 or 2002, like I was able to go onto her site and go, oh crap, here's this cover of Rawhide that you guys did where you changed the lyrics into, BDSM and, a little bit of Tom Lehrer meets, whatever. It meets the Blues
Through
Brothers.
pain and whips and leather, hell bent for lovin', wishing my gal was on her side. Yeah.
Push it in! Yeah, no,
I was really. I'm so glad that the Mittelschmerz website is offering that and still offering that, and that Connie's stuck with it so long. That's awesome. So like in the late '80s, I was starting to put. I was really very active in performing. After that Battle of the Bands thing, that punk club ended up hiring me to play there like basically every weekend. So I was kind of like their backroom band. Mostly, I think because I was one man and I fit, right. A real band would never fit back there, but having, just one guy, that works. And that was really great because like having a weekly thing like that really gave me a regular deadline to work with. Like, so I always wanted to try to have like something new to play. And so that really started giving me a good reason to, just really churn out, things. For years I didn't really know about, let's see. So I didn't really know too many bands or musicians or whatever that were doing a lot of sampled anything. Art of Noise was there, but they were on a level that I certainly couldn't really relate to. That is to say, they had a Fairlight, sampling system, which I'm sure cost about as much of a house as a house would cost then. And there was no way I was going to have anything like that. So whatever, I'll do what I can do. And so I was doing a lot of music that was much more, I guess I'll say, compositional, certainly very, song-based and, well, let's see. I remember, on my second cassette doing 2 covers from Schoolhouse Rock. There was the Rawhide thing. There were certainly other things that were, definitely very song-based. They had lyrics. They had a chorus and so on. There were some things that were a little bit more experimental. I remember doing a few things that were more like synthesizer instrumental kind of stuff. And I was still kind of feeling my way through things.
I find it funny.
I knew I liked comedy.
Oh, sorry.
What's it?
I was going to say, I find it funny. Your Schoolhouse Rock, one of your Schoolhouse Rock covers. I'd asked you about this previously. The way you approached that cover, to me, really spoke heavily of a Residents influence, which you say that you really didn't, care for the Residents, or you didn't really get exposed to the Residents at that time.
Yeah, I didn't really know their stuff too much. I couldn't even tell you for sure if I knew of the Residents back then. Probably not. Yeah. Like I say, I just didn't have very many cool friends, so I didn't have a lot of intros into certain whatever areas of like let's say the Ralph Records catalog or whatever, the Residents and Snakefinger and things like that. I just didn't really have the link to that at that time. Certainly when I started doing doing cassette tape trading and being part of the cassette culture, and when zine culture was really huge, and when I discovered that was like maybe very late 80s and into the early 90s. So Fact Sheet 5, for example, a very well-known compendium that would review they would review every zine sent to them. Amazingly Herculean, masochistic task. And it got just bigger and bigger as like all the zines were coming in. And then after a while, they would review cassettes too, which is, of course, I made a point to send in every cassette I did that way to make sure it got reviewed and people might hear about my stuff. And of course, I sent away for other cassettes as well. So I traded a lot of tapes back then. I think like then I started to understand that there were some other I think I probably would have learned about residents then. I remember getting like an early thing about Ralph Records where they'd locked Penn Jillette into a hotel room and dropped like some Ralph Records through the slot every like once a day or whatever to just see how he'd manage them. And like hearing his recording of like through the week as he progressively goes madder, with a steady diet of snake finger and whatever, and then starts to kind of succumb to this is incredible.
It's funny that I'm glad you brought up the whole the whole zine culture, because when you talk about tape trading and you're talking about early file sharing, when you're talking about zine culture, you're talking pre-blogs and before blogs were co-opted by social media accounts. So essentially, what you're talking about are social media influencers of the late 80s.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's definitely the closest parallel I can think to it. Since I was online pretty early, I was aware of some things that were going on, and so before there was like an internet and a World Wide Web, there were various email services that would talk to each other. So instead of the closed ecosystem of CompuServe, for example, you could actually send email to other universities and so on if you're on like various predecessors to what would become what as the internet. And so that way I first then became of email lists then. So this would be circa late 80s, probably when I got my job at CompuServe in 1987. And I think in 1990 they opened that's right, an email portal to the outside world, which only employees could use. And so once I figured out what I could do with it, I started writing everyone everywhere. I found out much later after like I stopped working there that I was using up like half of the traffic for the whole company through this portal. but I at the time there was a new music discussion list, an email list. This was when you could have just one new music discussion list on the whole of the listservs that were out there in the world. NM-list was what it was. I met a lot of people that way. In fact, some I still know to this day who were, musicians as well as music fans. And it was an amazing time. But back to zine culture and tape trading and so on. This whole network of like home tapers that had been really democratized by the availability of 4-track cassette recorders. And so these are, basically home studios that you could actually do some simple multi-tracking on. And this made it possible for anyone to make an album. And of course, then anyone did, and they weren't all good. But the possibility, though, was what was just magic about it, and that people could send these through the mail. They could, run off as many cassettes as they could, copy and send these out to others, maybe trading, maybe in trade, maybe to sell them, whatever. It was a really amazing time and amazing experience to be able to communicate with people, not just in other states, but in other countries, and experience what they're doing and what they're into. And of course, when you send someone a cassette album, you don't just send them the cassette, you don't just send them the case, but you pack it with all these extra things, as many as the next, that'll take you up to the next ounce of postage or whatever, extra stickers, extra flyers for, a show that was just here, and so on. And so I got these little tastes of all this other culture that was going on everywhere else in the world. It was really amazing.
Yeah, I was lucky enough, thankfully, you still have friends from that time period posting on your Facebook wall. And so they're posting some of these early zines and like little trifold things that you would make using different pen names and different members of the ECC, talking about like, your complaints about local radio and how you need a pirate radio station in your area. And all kinds of amazing
Still
stuff
do.
like that. One specifically was for your band Gaga. Can you talk more about Gaga?
Yeah. Yeah, so the bands that everyone doesn't know about me are things like, let's see, there's Gaga, there's the Weird Love Makers, there's the Mood Swingers, there's Mellow Death. I had a lot of other bands that I was doing that were definitely not like Evolution Control Committee, not entirely unlike, but definitely with a different idea, or maybe with a stronger concept or something. Mellow Death, for example, was very much Richard Cheese decades before Richard Cheese. It was basically lounge covers, piano lounge covers of alternative hits of the time, which would have been like Dead Milkman, Ministry, Devo. I think we did do a Devo track eventually. Rock You Like a Hurricane, I remember also doing. Scorpions was so good, and Piano Lounge. Anyway, but then Gaga, though, was like the sort of really chaotic, industrial, like kind of think Crash Worship, if you're familiar at all. But like something really noisy, primal, tribal, with flame effects, with a little Einstürzen and Neubauten thrown in with metal percussion, junk percussion, things like that. So like. Not that Evolution Control Cody was all that sterile, but certainly in comparison, Gaga was where I could get my like kind of dirty rocks off, I guess, or something, music making wise. It was also a chance to have a lot of other people to be part of the band. And while we had, I think, let's see, like usually 3 or 4 other core members, it escalated, and at times we had like a solid 8 or 9. I think our high watermark was like 12 people that were all part of this one show. So yeah, we did get very elaborate at times. Sometimes we would, let's see, I remember one appearance, we basically pretended to be a Norwegian death metal band. We had actually a friend's girlfriend was working at a butcher shop, so she got us some extra meat leftovers, including a whole goat's head. There was another one where we did this sort of, what was it? It was kind of an infomercial sort of thing. We actually had like callers standing by to take your call, and we're all in business suits and so on. There are plenty of other kind of themes that we put together for these.
Amazing.
But, yeah. Good times, I gotta say.
So here I'm again visualizing your birth, your time in Ohio. You come out of high school, you start to get influenced by music. You start your own band. You get your own you find the bar that you're going to start it all off on, and then you start to like just create. And I mean, unlike I've been in a number of bands. I know a lot of friends that are pretty prolific, but you were like extra prolific, I have to say, because not only were you creating all these multiple personalities and multiple bands and whatnot, but you also were influencing people in your own sphere. And actually, let me pause this because I do need to ask one last question about the ECC in the beginning. Is that, and something that you let out of the bag just now, which you kind of play with online, but I want to break a secret if we can here. And that is that if you look at old interviews, and if you look at like some of your own bio stuff that you put out, the band was started by you, TradeMark Gunderson, and your brother, your twin brother, Mike Gunderson. Now, the reason why this blows my mind is that not only did you have such a specific upbringing that really, pushed you to be so creative, but the idea that there's another person in the world that is exactly like you, I want to know what this person's up to right now. I want to know, is this person, does he have all these accolades? Is he as crazy as you? What's the truth here?
Not so much now, because you see, my brother died.
Oh, God.
Actually, my twin brother was alive in my head, and perhaps still is. But
so you never had a twin brother?
So I never biologically had a twin brother, Mike Gunderson. And the way it came about actually was, in fact, when Fact Sheet 5 was so active and the zine culture, I was so part of it, I was sending my tapes into Fact Sheet 5, which was edited by Mike Gunderloy. And as Mark Gunderson, I knew eventually there's going to be, a crazy mashup that's going to ensue with those two names. And it didn't take terribly long. I think it was maybe the second or third tape that I sent in to get reviewed, and they attributed it to Mike Gunderson instead of Mark. I was using Mark at that time. A trademark I started using in 2002, I think. Story about that
Yes.
later.
We'll
But
get there.
basically, so when that tape got reviewed as Mike Gunderson, I just decided, let's just roll with that. That sounds good. I think I'd like a twin brother. I never had a brother. Okay, Mike Gunderson it is. And so Mark and Mike were two brothers that were part of this. And so I think the next release was Compact Destructions, Discstructions, and Compact Destructions were using compact discs and destroying them in ways to make them just misplay or play in weird, fucked up ways. And so and then I just went whole hog on it. Like Mike Gunderson was there in the lab coat on there, pictured in one way. I then like shaved and changed my look and, got photographed for Mark Gunderson in a different photo and so on. I really rolled with that for a while. Part of that was like, I had these other bands where there were other members, and it wasn't like I was trying to keep Evolution Control Committee as like, this is my game only. I didn't really want that. Actually, I would have been happy to have other people be members of that, but at the time and for what I wanted ECC to be, I just didn't know those people.
Right.
I would eventually meet them, and in fact, a few people I did like that are actual biological people, I did invite in to be members of the ECC at one point or another. So there are actual other real members.
And
out
you
there.
actually have a sibling. You have a sister.
I do. Yes, I have a real sister. Still goth, I'm pretty sure, at 50.
Sweet.
And
The elder goth.
in San Diego. Yeah, but yeah, love her. Yeah.
So not only, and let me get back to what I was saying before. Not only were you making all these bands and whatever, but you helped found the electronic music scene in Columbus there.
As if there was one. Well, I mean, there was really, but it was like that punk club that had goths and reggae types and so on. Columbus also had a scene of people that were doing electronic music in very different sort of ways from each other that nonetheless were kind of lumped together because they found some commonality, even though like the early techno types that were starting to do their thing, they weren't really in the same vein as what I was doing, certainly. But that said, we wanted to band together and have some sort of coalescence or whatever, if we could, to coalesce into something that might be called a scene. I mean, that was a bit grandiose for our hopes, I think, of expectations at the time. But that said, I think before long we started realizing, these like minds and started both cross-pollinating, but also making compilations like the one you were holding up. I ended up collaborating with some of the others. Yep. So Adventures in Modern Recording there, put together by James Towning of Fact 22, who would go on to be a pretty amazing designer, but also did some really great early sometimes sample-driven music with his old Mirage keyboard, but also collected up a bunch of other musicians like Greg Fernandez and also Jeff Chenault. There are two other electronic types that I started collaborating with as the Weird Love Makers later on. That was very much an effort to do something that involved a lot of lounge music. We were all really super into lounge music, as well as really hard electronic music. So
akin to Tipsy, would you say?
Yeah, Tipsy, I was gleefully stealing as much as I possibly could from Tipsy as soon as I discovered
Genius.
Tipsy. Yeah. And but really great, amazing shows to this day. Jeff Chenault is pretty great in his own right and also very prolific. He has a lot of work under his name and under a lot of different names, especially Jeff Central rather than Chenault. And then Greg Fernandez, who did music as Good Q Sign before that, was someone who he's very hard to describe, but he's someone who he could probably walk into a thrift store with $20 because that's probably all he's ever going to have is $20. That's just him. and walk out with enough equipment from the thrift store to make like a full show of something that borders on electronic music, done with, say, broken tape recorders that auto reverse kind of weirdly, or record players that you can skip multiple records. Like he would take one record, break it in half, put that one on top of another one, and let the tone arm just jump and play half of the one record on top, half of the one that's underneath, and so on. Like he would make these, he would chart these loops that he would then etch onto it was basically turntablism in a completely non-funky sort of
Christian
way.
Marclay, kind of.
In a very experimental, a much more Christian Marclay sort of way, I guess, now that I think about it. But like 20 years before I ever knew who Christian Marclay was. Yeah, amazing.
So let's get a little bit more into the heart of the Evolution Control Committee and what really made it special. The key is that in 1994 you put out an album called Gunderphonic. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Gunderphonic was the first cassette album I did, which was purely sampled stuff. So this is an 8-track shell, which I hollowed out to put the Gunderphonic cassette inside. And so I really love this sort of media in media, or media masquerading as other media kind of idea. And, that's very much what sampling is, right? So sampling is also you taking some media, some found sound, and then like ripping its context out and putting it in some new context in some new way to be discovered anew. And so Gunderphonic was actually 95% or so analog. I couldn't really do any sort of digital sampling.
You're saying with like drums
point.
And bass, or are you talking about the way that you manipulated the sounds?
The way I manipulated the sounds. So technique-wise, I didn't really have. I had one. When I was doing this, like later in the process of it, I eventually could afford a digital sampling keyboard. But even that is, and then I also did, anyway, whatever the case, a lot of it was on tape, right?
Like reel-to-reel or 4-track, or what were you using?
A lot of cassette edits, some reel-to-reel, and some other magnetic media. But
so pause tape.
But a lot of pause tape stuff. I didn't want to mess with actually cutting and splicing. It's whatever, it's messy. It takes a long time.
It does take a long time, yes.
But I had a really great cassette deck that actually did this in a really good way. It was one of the last ones. It was still pretty mechanical, but very exact in how it would do its cuts. It was perfect for it.
So on that album, you not only is the format mashed up, where you've mashed together a cassette tape and an 8-track tape, but on that album are the original whipped cream mixes.
That's right. Yeah. So the whipped cream mixes, basically, this 45 that came out in 1994, or actually, wait, was it 94? This one is the pickled egg version. Oh, that's right. And then Erie picked that up. That's right. But anyway, the first recordings I did of that were actually much earlier. I think I did the whipped cream mixes probably first in 1991-ish, maybe.
That tracks, because here's something I wanted to bring up with you, is that you played a festival called the Red, White, and Foo Festival. And for that festival, you made a track called Red, White, and Foo, which was the same. And this is what I think is fascinating. First of all, most people in the bootleg scene, when they started reporting on it in 2002 and whatnot, they turned around and started saying that you had made these mashups in like 1996. Then comes out that they were on Gunderphonic in 1994. But really, they were released on an Eerie Materials compilation called How to Worship Mosquitoes on cassette only in 1993. So that brings it all the way back, like the mashup that most people in the bastard pop bootleg UK scene say like started it all. That brings it back to 93. But really, in order to get onto that, compilation, it had to have probably existed before. So as you say, 91. But at that same time, there's something that you made before that I'd like to pinpoint as the formula for this kind of mashup, and that is your Red, White, and Foo song that you did, which
Mm-hmm.
is the A-B layered kind of mashup. The top being a kind of motivational, quasi-religious, very nationalistic speaker over the top of a detuned country song.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I will say, though, those were not two separate sources. They were actually the same source. So this would be a 45 that I found with the spoken vocals over that patriotic country music. So think about like the sort of things like, I don't know, Letter to My Teenage Daughter
Oh,
or
okay.
whatever
Then I'm
kinds
wrong.
of
Then I'm wrong.
things.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. So it actually isn't a mashup in that way. It's more like my I don't know. It's a perversion, I guess. It's me just kind of like messing up the whole track, but otherwise pretty much the original track. I'm sure I messed up. Pitch shifting as well as some speed variation and so on like that. But that said,
The reason
yeah,
why I was
it's not really.
confused was is that you had the vocals on that are so clear, and it's so very obvious that the
Yeah,
music underneath it has been completely detuned.
because they put an instrumental version only on the
Ah,
flip
so it
side of
is
it.
two parts, but it's the same record.
Yes,
Excellent. That
right,
makes
right.
so much
Yeah.
more sense now. But let's talk
Yeah.
about the construction of By the Time It Gets to Arizona and your whipped cream mixes. You did this like when we talk about blends, which is what most people talk about proto mashups being from like hip hop culture. It's taking two records, playing them together at the same tempo, and getting it on two turntables and getting that into a mix. Now, what you did was completely it was a little harder the way that you did it, and if anything, I think it
Boy.
validates the when people say, "Hey, this is a little bit of out of time or out of key or whatever else like that." Like looking at the tools that you're using at the time, this is actually kind of
Yeah.
amazing.
Let me tell you, I wish I had a turntable at that point, like a Technics 1200, which I have two now, and love them. But at that time, this was like a linear arm turntable.
Like straight.
It didn't even have the tone arm you can pick up really. I had to by push button move the tone arm over and drop
Oh
it, and
wow.
no speed control on it, no speed variation. But the 4-track cassette, the Porta 2 cassette recorder that I'm using, that did have speed control. So I would have to use the speed control on that as I'm recording it to try to match that up, which is really tough because it's one dial up and down or whatever. It's not like you can touch the record. If you're a DJ and you're using a Technics 1200, you can touch the record and you get a feel for how to make how to sync things up. But it's much tougher to do it the way I was doing it. Little did I know. I didn't really know any better was the thing. If I did, I probably wouldn't have done it. But basically, that was the only way I could do it. And after a number of practice runs, I finally got it down. It's pretty tough when you have one thing that's drum machine driven with a very solid tempo versus something else, the Herb Alpert that's acoustic, that has a much more erratic tempo. But yeah, eventually, luckily I was, I don't know, at a point where I had the persistence that I managed to pull it off.
And pull it off you did. I mean, again, it's highly cited as the it's funny, like some people will call you the grandfathers, and again, the grandfathers of mashup, because you're a group and not just one man, but also I've heard people say that you're the godfather of mashup, which is confusing because when you type in godfather of mashup, and I remember when this happened, like post like 2003 or 2004, when DJ Z Trip started like really blowing up internationally and getting tons and tons and tons and tons of press, up to the point of today where he still is hugely popular. When you search Godfather of Mashup, it comes up with him because he put out, of course, Uneasy Listening Volume 1 in
Right. I love that when it came
2001,
out. It
which
was
was
amazing.
this
Yeah.
guy
Oh,
right
fantastic.
here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was. I listened to that. I wore that thing out when it came out. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, I guess it's like we were. Let's see. Looking back to the origins of this kind of stuff, you could probably pick like a few sort of camps that you might cite that it came from. People, some people would definitely want to point to early hip hop types like Z Trip and turntablists. Some might want to point to more avant-garde directions. So when I put Gunderphonic out, Gunderphonic is named because of Plunderphonic, John Oswald's band release that came out just 3 years before mine did. And so his was a huge influence on me. And then a year before that is when I discovered Negativland, which Negativland were just a monster influence for me. I mean, still very much are, right? But Negativland was, where were they from? They're not really from a rock direction. They're not from an avant-garde direction. They seem to be kind of their own hermetically sealed, self-contained world. Thank goodness for that. But you could probably cite some other directions for them too. Anyway, whatever the case, certainly different camps like to cite different directions or different origin stories for where this stuff came from, because mashup does really cross a lot of genres. I mean, necessarily mashup is mashing up all these other genres, right? So all of them end up having something of a vested interest in it, I think, too. Good, they should. But also, mashup has been really embraced and championed by a lot of various cultures, and those origin types as well, like that is avant-garde versus hip-hop, whatever, like that. A lot of those have been clinging to that as well. Whatever the case, anyway, I guess the story here is a lot of people like to see different origins. Well, I don't know if I could really cite, where I got the idea from. I wasn't that aware of DJ culture really for the most part. Like I say, I didn't even know enough to try to scare up a Technics 1200 if I could even have afforded it.
No,
at
you
the
wouldn't
time. But I wouldn't have known anyone that would have known how to do any DJ techniques to teach me how to do anything like with it. And I think probably the closest thing might be some avant-garde stuff. I knew a little bit, but not that much. I don't know.
Well, you mentioned John Oswald, Plunderphonics, and Negativland, and the timelines that falls into this narrative that we're painting of your life, and it really shows that, like, if I can go ahead and say it, like, that was the car bomb in your mind that really helped fuel a lot of your creations, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. I was really fascinated with especially John Oswald and Negativland when I discovered them, because the idea of making music out of just sounds really. I was sort of dimly aware of this. Like I say, I was an Art of Noise fan early on, so that would have, pegged me back at 1983-ish or whatever to know that that was possible. But then to hear it done in this more, I don't know, egalitarian way maybe, or a way that seemed more possible or approachable. John Oswald was a little distant. Like I still couldn't figure out how someone could put together something quite that dense. But Negativland I started to have a clue about, especially after I started working in college radio at that point, and would have experienced cart machines and things like what Don Joyce would have used with Negativland, and so I could start to kind of understand the possibility of it. Oh, do you have a little cart action hiding back there?
And Don's ashes.
Oh yeah,
I was lucky enough to get some of his ashes. Again, prime member of Negativland, Donald S. Joyce. Passed away not too long ago. And as an ultimate fan service, sent out it's like 0.2 grams of his ashes with a purchase of his last album. And I was also lucky enough to get a cart tape.
Oh, beautiful.
Cart. This one is Tonight.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. Oh, that's beautiful. Old media like that, I just adore. I guess, at this point, I was starting to collect a ton of records. Obviously, you can see behind me, I still have loads. But in addition to that, I was also doing a lot on cassettes, and so I was both recording and collecting, and then I just got wildly fascinated with any sort of weird media, especially ones that were either kind of lost or forgotten about. So stereo tape cartridges, the sort of like giant oversized predecessors to cassettes, or talking Viewmasters, which were Viewmaster reels that had little tiny records that were coupled with them. I mean, I just love things like that, and I still have a pretty decent collection of that kind of stuff too. I, of course, would get these things with the justification that I was getting them just to sample them, of course, but whatever. It's just tickling my fetish. I know that.
Speaking about your fetish, one of the first times I met you was at Recycled Rainbow around 2002 in Cleveland, Ohio. At a gentleman named Everyman's house there in the Lakewood area. This image always burns bright in my mind when I think of you. It was you and I on the front porch. I think maybe Eric Vance was there, a couple of other people. But you were showing off some of the interesting gadgets that you like to show off. One being an old army turntable that's in this huge case. But the one that really blew my mind and that I'm referencing here is that it was something that I guess was used to teach people for speech therapy. And it was this magnetic strip card that you could run between some tape heads and you could basically scratch with it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It was basically each one was about the size of a computer punch card, and it had a stripe of magnetic tape on the bottom, and there's a retrofitted cassette recorder and player that's retrofitted with some gear that you can actually slide this card through it. So it's amazing. I found this one then. I've only ever run into one other musician who ended up rounding up 3 of them and did this amazing performance with them. Anyway, but yeah, that was exactly the kind of thing I was always chasing after. Those kinds of weird, I don't know, things that are just either too unwieldy to be practical for anyone else, maybe. That Army turntable set, 2 turntables, speakers, and whatever the conversion unit to use Army power on it was to drive the whole thing, weighed a good few hundred pounds. It's so solid. I mean, it's, field dressed, ready for Army transport. And I'm happy to say I still own it. It's right above me in the next level up.
I mean, you could drive a tank over the thing and it's going to be fine.
That's exactly how they're built for why.
The other thing that I found amazing at that time period was that you had a hearse and you had pineapple drapes in it, and at the time your whole plan was, because again you were famous for your whipped creamed mixes, you were going to get a bunch of copies of Herb Alpert's whipped cream, and you were going to cut it out and cover the entire hearse with this album cover. And I remember bragging to all my friends of man, this guy, he's got a hearse, he's going to cover it in the album cover, the whole thing. But you went in a completely different direction with that hearse. Can you talk about that?
The hearse ended up being the Dazzle hearse. And so I had somehow seen patterns of Dazzle camouflage that were used on battleships in World War I. And partially into World War II. And they basically looked like psychedelic paint jobs. I mean, they looked like some sort of optical illusion that was, and it's weird to see something so military, like a battleship painted like this. And I just loved that pattern. I ended up ultimately making the Dazzle hearse, and the Dazzle hearse was painted with black and white alternating stripes. I mean, a lot of people would call it the zebra hearse, understandably, but no, it was very much influenced by Dazzle camouflage.
I find it hilarious that when I first got my chance to go to San Francisco and to DNA Lounge, that they actually have a Dazzle room, where it's the entire room is nothing but Dazzle camouflage.
Oh wow! I wonder if they maybe they got that from my hearse, which was out there for many years.
That's a question for them. I mean, I would be interested to know that.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I certainly went to DNA enough times, and my hearse was certainly well known enough around San Francisco. Could be.
That's great.
Herb Alpert wise, by the way, while I didn't cover my my hearse with it, hold on.
Record show and tell time, ladies and gentlemen, here with Trademark Gunderson.
I did eventually collect enough that I did cover a refrigerator with it, by the way. And so I ended up basically, I was doing so much thrifting to get records, I would end up picking up I was so sick of seeing whipped cream show up at every thrift store. And after a while, it's F it. I'm just going to buy every one that I see. It's just $1.
Right.
Eventually, I'll get them out of circulation. I won't have to see them again, right? Ha ha ha. Of course, that supply is self-replenishing. I learned after buying about 100
Yeah.
of them. But I had a crate of 100 of the same record, which every once in a while I would do something fun, like sneak that into a friend who was, he might set up a booth at a record sale or whatever. And so we'd sneak my crate of only whipped cream and other delights into the rest of the stuff or whatever. Anyway, later on, when I would get my MFA within the last 10 years, I started doing things like making remixes of the covers.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Without delight. All whipped cream. Double delights. This one is the sort of boob version. I figure like everyone just loved that record for the girl's boobs anyway, right? So this is Herb Alpert's Tijuana Boob. I don't know if you can.
I can definitely see that. Yeah, the taste of booby.
Taste of Booberine, Boob Potion number 9, Lemon Boob, Lolly Boobs and Roses Pea Boobs. Yeah. Oh yeah, and then the other thing here. Another thing I started doing album cover wise, and I never really quite got to flesh this out, but I had this idea about the deletals. Like, what if you could delete the Beatles, just in whatever ways that were possible? And so I started making various Beatles things where the Beatles were removed, in a sense. Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, again, more testaments to your creativity and the fact that you are amazing at documenting and performing your work so that it gets out into the public and sharing ideas. When we talked earlier about culture, about music, and how sometimes music isn't created in a vacuum. Music is created in a culture with other, like a bass player for a funk band might have been weaned on bluegrass. Somebody who's a classical artist might love Sir Mix-a-Lot. There's a ton of influences that go into the person that makes the music, and then even within those musical styles, you'll get flavors of other music. And really, when we talk about music borrowing from each other, we're just really talking about culture, because that happens in language, that happens in film, that happens in art, it happens in everything. And all of this, at least it's apparent to you and I, is contradictory to what copyright has become. And copyright, the idea that this is my idea and I own this and I control this, and therefore, if you use this or do this with what I've made, I'm going to sue you.
Oh, foolish mortals. You think you can own intellectual property? Yeah. But yeah, there is, I don't think I totally got it until Negativland started doing things like the letter U and the numeral 2, getting their suit from U2, and then eventually putting together the book and all this stuff that really starts to discuss and explore this whole concept of originality and sampling and so on, right? So fair use, fair use, of course, a clause of copyright that actually gives people permission, as it were, to use things without permission. And I started really learning a lot from them, of course. But then I started having to know a lot more when, hey, there we go. Remember. Always remember. And certainly when I got my own legal scuffle, when I put Rocked by Rape out and then got a threat of suit about that, I started really having to know my stuff about copyright and started getting a lot of invitations to talk to people about it too, which was really, really great. I still do talks about copyright, actually. In fact, so I now teach digital art courses at Ohio State University, and there's another instructor there who instructs incoming freshmen, and so basically he kind of lays out like how to do, I don't know, write research reports and cite references and things like that. And he always invites me in for an alternative copyright perspective about how copyright doesn't have to be just this big burdensome onus over everyone, weighing everyone down and stifling creativity, when in fact the law, literally its definition reads that it is there to promote creativity.
Correct. I mean, and that's what's so heartbreaking about this, is that, we now live, I feel like it's only gotten worse since Negativland first, really lit this fire and started this battle. And like now we've got like, the outcomes in courtrooms, that like the Bruno Mars outcomes and the Katy Perry outcomes, where it's like you stole a groove, or you stole like a couple of like synthesizer like notes at the beginning of the song, and it's not even that they stole it, it's just that they played it similarly on another instrument. And people just don't. Most people stealing
style is as old as making music. I mean, that's where music comes from. People hear something they like, they do something that's pretty influenced by it because they liked it, and so they want to do something, but they want to put their own self into it enough so that it's theirs, at least changed enough so that it is theirs now and not just copying the original. Although that's certainly been done too. Folk music has a long history of just literally just swiping the best lines from other things and putting it into your own stuff. And so there's this whole history of borrowing that music has. Some of it lowbrow, some of it highbrow. Igor Stravinsky certainly is a name that comes to mind, and his heyday was just about 100 years ago now. So certainly nothing new.
When talking about this, I can't help but bring up the name Michael E. Harrington, who is a good friend to you and to myself as well. He recently was able to help free We Shall Overcome and allow it free it from copyright and return it to the public domain, which is great, as well as Happy Birthday.
Yeah. Right. Which is amazing that is finally public domain. I can't believe that, that ownership of that clung so long, but I mean, maybe I can. There's certainly a lot of money in there. I mean, certainly, lawsuits about sampling are mostly about money, right? Certainly the Bruno Mars ones and ones where there's so much money that's tied up and possible to be gotten from it. I get it. And certainly the ones where, some older musicians who have been largely forgotten about, who then, Stevie Wonder, the album that Gangster's Paradise sampled from that album, I think there was like maybe less than 1 million sold. And then Coolio sells 12 million of the thing that samples it. Who the hell's Coolio anyway, right? So, I could certainly imagine when the Stevie Wonders, or especially the lesser knowns like Betty Wright or someone, end up getting sampled in a way that they want, some element of that. Certainly when I was starting to put music out, I was starting to think about that too. And this at the time in the 90s when I was really starting to put stuff out, but before things like Creative Commons or the idea of copyleft or so on like that really came into the public discussions, I was trying to come up with something of some sort of agreement, I guess, or whatever, like the stipulation or whatever, putting my stuff out. In other words, I didn't want to put out my stuff and just make it copyright. I also didn't want to just make it free or public domain. That is, I wanted credit for what I was doing. I wanted people to just to know that, I was the one that did it. Basically, if you want to copy my album, that's fine, but just keep my name on it. That's pretty much it.
Which Creative Commons covers pretty well nowadays.
Yeah, and if you're doing something with it that's really commercial, like you're going to make a big bunch of money, I'd like a sliver of that money, or some smaller bunch
for commercial use. Yes.
Yeah, I think basically I came up with this quote that was like, I don't really want to make a killing. I just want to make a living.
Yeah.
And that was, while I wouldn't mind making a killing, I really would just be happy with the living from that, which I certainly never really found. I mean, I never made a actual living off of my music, of the music alone. Certainly, ancillary little connections to it or whatever, or connections to my art, whatever artistic abilities. That is, for example, my teaching art now, do pay my rent and pay my bills. But otherwise, that's not from my own art.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
But that being said, let's get into, because again, we only have 2 hours, and I could talk to you for probably about 10.
I know. I can't believe we're already.
Yeah, it's
80
crazy how
minutes
this
into
works. But that being said, let's
Okay.
get into another really important work of yours. Matter of fact, before I even talk about it, I'm just going to play a little bit of it here for the audience. Here we go.
This is the CBS Evening News. With Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Danger, war, killer, fraud, CIA, mayhem, crisis, horrible, inflation, military threat, the flaming debris, fatal heart attack, stress injuries, prison disaster, economic collapse, dangerous radiation, a tide of violence and human misery, a liar, and an unremorseful killer. Communist international smuggling pipeline, starving victims, and how they die. Chemical weapons, carpet bombing deaths, tough FBI, kill and injure children, police conspiracy, negative attacks, discipline, sex and drinking binges, dying of a heart attack, dying of breast cancer, dying of a Japanese nuclear bomb, mountains of credit card debt, the mountain of cocaine, tons of cocaine, atomic bomb radiation experiments, unwitting test subjects, dangerous radiation, marijuana abuse, hooked on drugs. Time for us to bug out. Rocked by rape. Rocked by rape. Rocked by rape. Sex, drugs, and rocked by rape. Nazi war criminals, cancer, garbage, murder, caution, terrorist, castigation, police conspiracy, dramatic urban torture, drunk driving, hostage siege, government shutdown, collapses, desperation, despair, deep into debt, criminal persecuted, semi-automatic handgun, explosive gunman killed a tourist, funeral victims, racist massive lawsuit, hostage, ethnic war, cancer death rate fleeing for their lives, CIA narcotics operations, hungry, homeless, frustrated terrorists, spoiled, unsanitary, hard-hitting losers, brutal, bizarre, critical bombing, the gang's rule, criminal anti-government love triangle, deeper and deeper into damage, even death, anti-drug DEA, worldwide ban. Time for us to bug out. Rock.
Oh. Oh. Oh, wow. Oh. Hmm. Oh, right. I think maybe yeah. Oh, fantastic. Oh, wow. Yay. I think I remember the spectrograph thing now, actually. That rings a bell. Wow, that is fantastic. I mean, certainly it became important for me too, of course. Boy, my lovely old cat Idle on the cover, she had 7 claws on her front paws. She really was a DJ. And in fact, the other one, the whipped cream mixes, that's my cat, haven't. Oh, sweeties, I miss them. Yes, all my cats have contracted names. Haven't, like have not. Shan't is a current one. Shall not. Shouldn't is my other current one. But yeah, it'll like it will was the one on the cover of Rocked by Rape, and so Rocked by Rape. Boy, let's see. Second release on Eerie Materials after they released the whipped cream mixes, and I knew I wanted to do something because the whipped cream mixes had done pretty well, and I wanted to do something kind of like that, something as we would call now mashup-y. And I then let's see. At the time, I was starting to finally be able to do things that were digitally done, digital editing, digital audio, computer-related tools were just getting to the point where this was finally possible for mere mortals. And so I was using Cool Edit Pro, I'm pretty sure. Yes, Cool Edit Pro house, which was basically what I was going to use to. I knew I remember like having the vision for Rocked by Rape when I think I was like on a ski lift or something, and it came together in my head. I mean, honestly, it was one of the closest things to like a sort of epiphany from above or something. But I heard it very much already kind of finished in my head even before I had sampled the first thing. And when I got back home, I started recording all the violent words and phrases Dan Rather was saying every night on the evening news. AC/DC, I certainly already had some of. And so after about, I think, 6 weeks of news recording, I had plenty of material and just started splicing it together digitally now. And so I knew that I could use digital tools to do something far more intricate and far more granular than it was ever possible to do in audio or in analog. And so I wanted to do that to really kind of capitalize off of that and really, show this kind of next leveldom. And so I started putting all the Dan Rather bits together, splice by splice, sample by sample, and Cool Edit Pro crashes. And I start to realize like I'm doing something so complex that Cool Edit Pro like can only handle like 1 minute of it. And so I'd have to do like 1 minute, save that and start a new fresh file, do the next minute. And yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, not so many recovered files back then, yeah, or possible. But anyway, eventually limped all the way through every minute and mixed down each and then spliced the whole thing together to make the track. And so anyway, Eerie Materials loved it, put it out. I think it was out for like a good year before the stink started getting raised. And it took basically because after about a year, it got a review in, I think it was Spin magazine. And that one review in Spin was enough. And we immediately got threatening letters from CBS's lawyers, from attorney Sanford I. Cryle. And that was sent to both us, the band, the label, Eerie Materials, the distributor as well. They basically threatened everywhere up and down the chain. And and at the time, Eerie Materials wasn't really, they didn't have the stomach for a fight. They were just about to move out of the country to Guam. Well, I guess it isn't out of the country, but whatever the case. Uh, they didn't really want to get into a protracted battle like this, and so they deleted it from their catalog. Not that they really wanted to, but Yeah, and the distributor certainly didn't want any fight either, so they deleted it as well. And so I was left with this, this awesome track that I knew was great, and certainly at least for the year it was out, I was certainly getting some great feedback about it, and I had this legal threat in my hand saying that if I ever performed it again, that they were going to go after us. And it's like, what do you do with that? And luckily, I'd seen how Negative Land handled things, and in fact, I did actually get in touch with Negative Land at that point to say that I had something on my hands that was pretty similar, would love any advice, and they were great about it. Hostler, especially Mark Hostler, was hugely helpful in every step of that and giving me a lot of advice, which turned out to be incredibly useful and valuable. So, and basically we kind of waged a minor war in the press. There was plenty of other press that was willing to write some sympathetic supports towards our side of things, and to defend the David and this Goliath struggle. And CBS just never basically followed up. Even when I included the Rock by Rape track on Plagiarhythm Nation, 4 years after that, CBS never did anything further, thankfully. Mm-hmm. uh, So I never got to see that, and I heard about that both from you as well as from let's see, P. Hicks. I know got to see it as well. He at least caught enough to know it was like a fundraiser for like spina bifida or something, I guess. Whatever the case, yeah, a C-SPAN thing. I mean, for years after that, it was great to be able to claim. There's a lot of bands that can claim a lot of stuff. Not many can claim they've had play on C-SPAN. And they've got a word in the dictionary, which we did as well. And so, I started like lining up things like that were just really great. Like, those are accomplishments, right? Hearing Dr. Demento say your name on there, that's an accomplishment for me anyway. That was a huge, huge thing. Yeah.
Man, oh man. So, I'm sorry, I got distracted.
Let's see. There's certainly, Rock by Rape, getting that out and getting the trouble from it, and really kind of fearing for a while like I was going to lose perhaps some of the best the best thing I'd maybe ever done up to that point was really kind of scary. I mean, it really made me wonder how much I should or could fight this. I mean, I certainly didn't have any possibility of coming up with legal fees or whatever to actually really fight it, and it got me really certainly learning a lot about copywriting and so on like that. And certainly it was a big influence when I came up putting the next thing together. So All Rights Reserved was an album that I put out a few years ago. Let's see, 2011, I guess, would be the release date. And so Rock by Rape really was very much the influence to have on the front a listener license agreement. And this listener license agreement is very much like, the software agreements that you agree to that you see when you're signing up, when you're installing iTunes or whatever like that. And do you read that lengthy contract? No, no one does. In fact, when I've asked intellectual property lawyers if they read them, no, they don't read them either. No one does. But they're legal contracts, right? They're legally binding in some sort of way, right? So I figured, I'm going to just use this to my advantage and just kind of go the opposite way, other than the open source copy, Creative Commons E kind of, no. All rights reserved. My rights. And in fact, I'm just going to have this listener license agreement. And the agreement number one is you are not allowed to listen to this record. You are forbidden from listening to this album in whole or in part. And there's a few more things.
And you start
on
the album off with you specifically saying, like the first track is you reading the license agreement.
Yeah, just in case you're trying to like just skip past this. No, 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 no. You're going to listen to this first track on the album. Yeah. Well, so why? Well, I figure, what are you going to do? You're going to ignore the damn thing anyway and just listen to it, right? But if, let's say, Britney Spears lawyers might be wanting to sue me for the sampling of at least one track on that album, or one of the many other sources. Anyway, if they want to sue me in a court of law, they're going to have to admit that they listened to the album and broke my listener license agreement, and I can countersue them for damages on that. So that's why I
Checkmate.
did that. Gotcha.
So okay, so you got
Hasn't actually
sued,
come
or
to
they
that,
tried to sue
but
you for Rocked by Rape,
hope
and
one
it
day.
got you, the attention of Spin Magazine and a few other things like that. And you're using these digital tools and whatnot. At what point did you first become aware that there were people across the pond, as they say, that were interested in your work, and if anything, calling you an influence?
So let's see, right around when Rock by Rape came out, or certainly right around when it got in trouble, I started getting some good invitations for some good gigs. Really good gigs, like, international gigs. So all of a sudden I was getting an invitation to go perform in Italy or in England or a few other places in Europe. In 2001, I got invited down to play Australia, which was fantastic. But in England, I started realizing like they certainly had an appetite for this kind of thing. I knew that already in a way. Whipped Cream Mixes, the first release of that was not Eerie Materials from San Francisco, but actually Pickled Egg Records from Leicester, England. And so I already knew, they had been, they were certainly aware of this kind of thing, at least from the stuff I was doing. But I started to become aware that that there was getting to be a real movement around it. Like there was starting to get to be something that was bordering on mainstream. Well, not bordering, it was mainstream there in the early, 2000 aughts. And so it was really fascinating to go over there, especially around 2002, 2003, for a few festivals that I was booked at, and start to see this thing pick up enough steam that it is like mashup things are charting, and they're not called mashups at this point. They'd picked up the name bootlegs, which is kind of a troublesome name. I mean, because it already has a musical definition, like as in a recording of a live concert bootleg. Right. But certainly it at least delivers, a little bit of the flavor of it and gets an idea across. And hey, at least it's a name on the genre, which didn't really have a name before. I mean, for all the years that Negative Land and John Oswald and me and whatever were doing sample-y based stuff, no one had really coined a name for it. I mean, plenty had tried. My attempt, Plagiarhythm. I thought Plagiarhythm, rhythm, would be good, right? Plagiarized rhythm.
It was good enough for the Macmillan Dictionary, was it not?
Thank you, Macmillan. And then, Plunderphonics sometimes would get used, but of course that's tied to John Oswald specifically. And, there's certainly other ones. I always liked someone, I don't know who coined this, collage rock, especially when college rock was like kind of a thing. Like, I sort of liked, I don't know, for a moment, I thought maybe. Well, whatever the case, I mean, I was certainly just happy enough to get a term. I'm happy to be pigeonholed. Please pigeonhole me. Just pick a term and let's go with it. Bootleg it is, fine. So bootlegs became the thing for in England at that time. And I think it was one of the times that I was there, like there was actually, the top charts or whatever had a mashup track on it, like an honest to God mashup. And I was like, wow, this could... this thing that I always thought was inherently its own poison pill. Like it could, it's an illegal art form that you could never possibly take mainstream. Like it's, guaranteed to always be under the radar by definition or something like that. Maybe it doesn't have to be that way. This is kind of the first glimpse I got to see where that was a possible future. Yeah. Yeah. It was an amazing time. I mean, it was really eye-opening, and it just showed me like, wow, there might be a potential here. that things are changing. Maybe it's not going to be like I would have guessed.
Well, looking at the record, and by the record I mean the press record, not the record. In 2002, you really had.
By the way,
say what?
By the way, speaking of bootlegs, there was a bootleg made of the bootleg. This is a bootleg copy of the whipped cream mixes, as well as
Mixed Business,
Rocked by Rape on this one. Yeah. Anyway,
what's the Beck version that's on there?
It's or wait, which was this again? This is I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's not Rocked by Rape and whipped cream. It's just whipped cream mixes with this Beck ACDC thing that I didn't do. Yeah. Anyway,
that's amazing. So anyway, 2002, 2001, the boom selection era. You actually wound up really. They were the ones to really solidify you in that scene as far as your first mentions and stuff like that. And in 2002, you were busy contributing to things like Snuggles' Free Speech for Sale, which you did the IGA Pineapple Party track that my wife and I still to this day sit there and say holes and holes and holes all the time whenever we talk about Pineapple. But also the 2002's cookbook record and CD with the remix of Magnetize Your Food, which is a track of yours. But while you're busy trying to continue your art, people have grabbed on some of your older stuff to show that you have influenced this huge thing, and it gets you a whole nother wave of press. So in 2002, the New York Times turns around and writes about it with a thing called "Spreading by the Web Pop's Bootleg Remixes" by Neil Strauss in May of 2002, and then in 2002, the very popular. What was it? Best Bootlegs in the World Ever compilation came out, which was super influential to the mashup scene. This compilation, it went everywhere, and you had great real estate on that compilation. You were track number 4, right in between Soulwax's "Push It No Fun," and then right before Freelance Hellraiser "Smells Like Booty," which is one of most people, when you talk about what were some of the first mashups you've ever heard, it was either Stroke of Genius or it's Freelance Hellraiser "Smells Like Booty." So if they're listening to this thing, they heard your stuff well before that other track. If they're listening to the CD,
yeah.
And then of course you also made the 3 CD compilation, the Nevermind the Bootlegs that Boom Selection put out, the data disc thing in 2002. You had a whole 9 tracks of your stuff on that CD.
Awesome. Yeah, I suppose it was, thankfully I had been around for long enough that probably I was at least a little bit known. Actually, in a way, I'm kind of almost surprised in some senses, because this is certainly a movement that could have just picked up and, gone on without anything older than, back when I was doing these origin tracks. And it would have been easy to get missed by that wave or whatever. But that said, luckily, I got some, thank goodness I got some props for this. And, it was also a good reaffirmation for me, I think, to kind of see this kind of starting to pick up and go, like I said, in this other direction, this possibly mainstream direction, or at least if not mainstream, something that would be far more popular than I ever would have predicted, like a more negative landy style, pigeonholing to have lived in, from then on. And it was great to see, the possibility of, I don't know. I think also new technology was feeding into this. There were a lot of new tools that were coming out that were making, time warping or syncing up things a lot easier. Ableton Live would have been just maturing at this point, which would become a staple for Mashup and other musicians for years to come to this day, really. And so I think, that kind of nice storm of all those things coming together was really, really lucky for us all. But I, was very happy to see this come up. Of course, gratified to get some nods as being part of the origins of it, and frankly decided to, I don't know, I won't say cash in on it. I certainly didn't cash in, or that is money-wise. significantly. But certainly, I like the idea of making something that would be, I don't know, club friendly, maybe, or at least something I could just be like rocking to in a sense. But it also brought up a sort of, I guess I'll call it like a philosophical kind of concern. And I don't know, not to like overly philosophize it too much. But I started to see that what the mashup, what would become the mashup movement, was very much on the, I guess I'll call it the praising side of the sources that they would use. Much like a remix producer would be using, remixing sources to further glorify them, if you will, I guess, to champion them, to celebrate them. Mashup, it didn't take very long before mashup started in that direction to really embrace that as well. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that this is, a bad thing or it's evil or, this is when, the movement got perverted or something. No,
corporate music.
I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
Like I'm just as much for that in, these and as long as you know what is you're doing. But also, I really, really appreciated the more critical aspects that sampling had as a prerogative of making music. That is, Negativland very, very rarely, if ever, would have sampled something in order to champion the person that they're sampling or the source of the samples. They're not doing this to celebrate that as much. They're doing it because this is their technique and their artistry or whatever is manipulating, bending, and twisting and distorting other recorded bits of work. And you can hear their artistry in that bending and that distortion and so on like that. But in mashup, where you start to remix and really celebrate the originals that you're sampling, it loses that criticality. It loses that sense of, I don't know, something of a detachment. And often, sadly, the touch of the artist as well. The touch of the artist doesn't necessarily come through when you are really just raising your fist in the air to the awesomeness of that lick or that groove or those lyrics or the strength of that performer. It's that performer that is being sampled that is carrying that weight or that motivation rather than the mashup artist. Often, not always, but oftentimes, that's what I would end up hearing. And it was something that I had to kind of get my head around for a while and really kind of come to terms with a bit, because I wasn't immediately comfortable with the sort of praising side of things. I really had like a punk streak in me that did, a bad boy streak or whatever, that did not want to be on that side that could potentially be seen as maybe almost selling out in a way. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of the UK scene kind
of
felt the same way. If you look at my last interview with Thrift Shop XL, like a lot of it was taking the piss out of like, certain types of music or, trying to make something that's more funny as opposed to something else that is super powerful, in my opinion, about mashups. And that is taking two sources that don't seem to work to make a piece of work that almost seems like it already existed and is not necessarily funny or critical, but is this epiphany of like, wow, I know both of these things. I'm listening to it right now, and I can hear them separately, but it's almost like they never existed separately. They become this new and appreciative thing that is wholly unique and is no longer a parody or funny or anything else like that. So it's like one of the things that I want to explore with this program and in future reports when I start doing more news-oriented type stuff, and I'll definitely have you back on to weigh in on some of these things because I know that you are a valued expert in the field. That being said, mashups don't have to be just one thing. It's kind of like what you had said previously, how you were really glad that there finally was a term for this, and maybe in the future, matter of fact, where is it? I had it. You were talking on one of your live journal blog posts in April of 2005. This is some digging that I did. You were talking with Stalio on Live Journal, and you made a prediction. And this is, again, your love of predictions. You said, I'm predicting that the mashup style will complexify and eventually encompass a broad range of styles that will basically include everything we've done. And in that way, we have a head start. and to be certain, mashup is a whole bunch of different things. There are so many subgenres of mashup and so many styles of mashup that still to this day have not been solidly defined. Like when I'm talking to you, you and I are very well acquainted with the mashup. I can talk with, Adriana, and we can really from Booty Mashup, and we can turn around and literally like pinpoint like, okay, A and B and Mega Mash and whatever else. We can pinpoint these small things, but even then there might be some disagreement on what constitutes a Mega Mash versus a Medley Mash versus, a Maxi Mash or whatever you want to do. And I feel like there needs to be more talking about this, which is another reason I started this program, to be able to more solidly define these terms, so we're not able to be as ignored as easily by the mainstream, and squashed into our corner, and then our history is completely erased. So again,
I think one thing about this that is both a plus and a minus for the whole mashup thing is mashup doesn't really describe the music; it describes the technique.
Right.
It describes a technique of taking multiple sources, at least two, and combining them in a way that hopefully provides a vision of something new that could, that never was going to be unless you'd put the two together, something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that is, the fact that we're talking about, all these sorts of terms that came up before, like tape collage or something, like, again, still describe the technique of it without really describing what you're collaging or what you're producing in these collages. And in that, and like I say, this is both a plus and a minus. I think it's a minus in some sense because some people that want to talk about genres or consider mashup as a legitimate genre might have some difficulty with it because it doesn't really describe the music that is actually being made. On the other hand, because it doesn't, it keeps things open. It keeps things flexible. It keeps our potential wide open for what could make a mashup. It could be something more beat oriented that's maybe hip hop derived or dance floor derived, or it could be Herb Alpert, or it could be the found J&H Productions cassette, or all these weird outsider sources, or whatever, or none of those.
You're talking more towards the crumple banger side of things, which also, if you mix that together with like YouTube poop for the younger generation, it becomes Sound Clown. There are existing mashup like subgenres, I guess you would, or that's the question. I don't think it's a genre; it's a style. Right?
I never actually had heard those terms before you'd introduced me to them a short bit ago. But I just love like all those genres or whatever are something I've been really fascinated with. And in fact,
yes,
can
please
I show
do.
everyone something?
For those of you who don't know, Trademark has had an artistic license for forever. Finally, in 2012, went to go get his Masters of Fine Arts, his MFA, and one of his projects was this
music map of every genre of music. And while I'm sure you can't read any of the details on it, this is 770 genres of music and the connections that put them together into a yellow metal neighborhood, a blue rock neighborhood, a green hip hop neighborhood, and so on and so forth, all those little subgenres.
And you can order your hard copy of this map for only $19.95. Now, if you go to trademarkg.com, you have this up on your website, right?
I do, though. Yeah, you can't order it, but you can see the thing for free, and there's an interactive version that you can zoom into. So, but I have a copy of this. That's actually an older version, and there's a newer one that's up on my living room wall. And I still look at it and look at all the little genres and discover a new one practically every time I'm looking at it. Chopped and screwed. What's chopped and screwed? And then I go look it up, and it's like, oh, okay, that's wow. And it's like it's also like a bit humbling in a way. Like as much music as I have listened to and loved, I think probably of those genres that are on there, there's maybe 10% that I like,
Yeah.
maybe. But then again, that's probably 5% more than
Yeah, and
everyone else.
not to go too deep into it, but per our conversation earlier, even making a map like this, when you try to like define a thing, your implicit like tastes and biases will actually help mold that map. Will I guess taint the map.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely saw that with like I certainly was influenced by seeing other efforts that came before it. Like Ishkur's Guide to Electronic Music was a big
Yeah.
one. Loved that thing. Loved his writing, snarky and beautiful, and even especially loved that he actually had a tape collage category amongst all these other techno derivatives that figured into it. And loved seeing how he made this sort of family tree of interconnectedness or whatever of all these genres. And for years, it was one that I would point to whenever someone would ask me what the hell the difference was between jungle and drum and bass, and I could say, just take a look there. But I never really saw one that that one was like limited to more techno things. Other ones that I would see would be kind of limited to the preferences of the person that had put it together. I mean, great. I mean, that's what drives them to do it, of course. Good. But I'd always dreamed of seeing one that would be just really all encompassing. That would really kind of have everything. That would be so all encompassing that I would learn things by looking at it. And that's how that one came to be. I ended up, let's see, so this is after I had gotten my MFA in art and technology. And so I had not done data visualization in this sort of way, but had really been very interested in it and had shown various other works from other artists that had used things like this. And so I like a lot of good artists, stumbled my way through it ignorantly, eventually like cobbling together little bits of knowledge that were just enough to actually put something together.
Oh, and it looks like we've had our very first freeze there. I'd like to apologize for everybody for the technical glitches that we've had in this program. That being said, this is the art of doing it live, which is something that TradeMark is very familiar with, because one of the things I'd like to talk to him about when he comes back.
I'm probably not even.
Yeah, no, you froze up. You're back.
And there we go. And I think
so.
We're back,
Hold on. Unfortunately, we have to wrap this up because we only have 5 minutes left. I know it just flies by like that. I'll definitely have to have you back on. But that being said, cool. I do want to touch a few things before we go. I'm just going to say this real quick. We've been plagued by these technical glitches during this show. Again, I apologize for that. I'd like to thank you for sticking around. That being said, technical glitches is something that's part of live performance, as our guest here knows. Might I give you a snippet that I meant to give you earlier of when of the Thimbletron, which is a MIDI device that's a pair of gloves that harness the power of Thimbletronium in order to be able to create music, if you will. And of course, that's the magic term. But check this out. Yeah. Here's a snippet of the Thimbletron.
Rock by rate. Rock by rate. Rock by rate. Stretch drugs. Rock by rate. Look out, look out, look out, look out.
So I've seen a good number of your performances live with the Thimbletron. It doesn't always, because again, it's a volatile compound Thimbletronium. It doesn't always work as well as you'd like it to when you touch the thimbles together.
Its half-life is not always certain. I really wanted some way of performing this kind of mashup-y, sample-y music, and this was in the 90s when I was really, I was doing performances, but I was using sampling keyboards and, technology. There wasn't a lot of sampling specific technology. There are no grid controllers or things like that. And so eventually I was getting fed up with why have I have this sampling keyboard that has a piano style keyboard? This does not relate to the samples that are on here. And so I started thinking about how I could make something. And luckily my geek upbringing had me, gave me enough electronics knowledge. So I had some electronics experience. So and growing up, my dad actually put together the TV from a Heath kit. So my dad built the TV when I was growing up.
Wow, that's
anyway,
great.
This gave me enough knowledge to be able to take something metal like thimbles and wire them together so that when you touch the thimbles together, they trigger different sounds. Basically, any switch, an electronic switch, is just two pieces of metal touching together, whatever the metal is.
When you did this, were you aware of Reed Ghazala and circuit bending at all?
I was, yeah. There was a great, back in my zine days, a great zine called Experimental Musical Instruments that was coming out from Nicasio, California, and Reed Ghazala figured in prominently in there. So this was kind of his heyday. He wrote the origins of those circuit bending, the legendary circuit bending things that he had done in those in the pages of that zine for that zine.
Real quick,
so,
unfortunately, I'd love for you to finish the story. We're definitely going to have to finish this at another time. But some things I wanted to touch on real quick. Back when we were talking about like the 2002, whatever, in 2005, DJ Food released Rating the 20th Century. You were one of the only artists to have 2 tracks on there other than, the hosts themselves, the Cold Cut, right? And what made that even more special for you was the fact that it was narrated by Paul Morley of Art of Noise, huge influence for you. So this is a crowning achievement. You've been lucky enough to perform with all of or almost all of your major influences. Negative Land. You've done was it Plenterphonics? John Oswald.
Yep, John Oswald.
Christian Marclay.
Christian Marclay as well. Boy, there's I've been lucky enough to have some really great gigs, especially overseas. Ideal Festival in Nantes put me on stage with Jean-Jacques Perret and FM Einheit of Einstürzen und Neubauten. I was opening right before Wire. Like I got to say, and okay, stick around, coming up, Wire. Holy
and like
crap,
I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have this guest back on because again, this person's This amazing artist's catalog cannot be contained within 2 hours. I'm going to leave you guys with a couple of things. Number one is a lesson that you wrote, again, going back to your live journal from 2005. This is right as you gotten back from the Influencers Festival in Barcelona. And you decided to write down like some tips that you could share with other artists that would hopefully inspire them to go forward with their art. And so you said these things. You said leave a legacy, document everything. Number 2, make backups. Yeah. Number 3, the media is hackable. Use it. Number 4, you know your audience. Number 5, people love gizmos, gadgets, and interactivity. I'm just going to stop saying numbers. Being the first to widely reveal secret knowledge can allow you to take credit for its discovery. Staying under the radar keeps you out of suit. But is that good? Don't just take easy converted audiences. It's okay to do something just for the art of it, but don't expect others to be interested. A well-known character stereotype gives your audience an easy in. That feels like wrestling knowledge. Doing illegal things is the cheap shot to make waves. The most famous geniuses are IQ 110, not 120 plus. People want to believe things that are too good to be true. I think we found that out in 2020. If you look like you know where you're going, people will follow. Persistence makes the portfolio. And finally, take the time and money to do quality work and art. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here. Thank you, Trademark G, for sharing everything. I'm going to give a small little snippet of you at your first time when Booty had just moved to the DNA Lounge in early 2006. You were the monthly guest because they were just a monthly at the time. But again, some parting words from you from the stage of Booty. We're headed into mashup listening with Adriana A.
Awesome.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you so much for doing these incredibly valuable conversations.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you once again. Here we go.
I am so fucking happy to see the entire world mashing it. I am so happy to have the whole Booty night and to have mashups going the whole world over and all of you rocking the mashups with me.